us talking because we are largely weird when we can like that. So what? Oh my god! People talking about your biggest like lesson in your 3 years. So what is the process of like letting go of the structure in the relationship look like while still having to maintain structure?
It's a constant negotiation.
All right. So, hey everybody. My name is Briana.
And I'm Khirsten.
And we are both PhD candidates. And so something that Khirsten and I have been thinking about, talking about a lot lately are relationships. And relationships, not just fly-by-night relationships, but intimate relationships, as well as balancing those relationships while you're getting a PhD. And that's something that we haven't talked about for real. Like I don't feel like that is something that everyone gets a chance to see, because it's always either you're talking about a PhD in isolation or you're talking about a relationship in isolation. It's never anything that can intersects from my perspective. So I think one reason why we've had such fruitful conversations is because we are trying to do these things at the same time, right? Khirsten is in a 3-year relationship, and I am just now entering the dating scene. And so as a result, I find it difficult to navigate such spaces. Khirsten has been there, done that, so I find myself talking to her a lot. And you want to say something?
No, you introduced. You good.
And so as a result, I wanted to have the conversation. So as I'm on Periscope here, I'm also recording here because it's going to go on my YouTube channel. If you're not following me, it's Briana Whiteside. Go ahead and follow. I talk about natural hair, graduate school, and spiritual journeys. All right, so let's just get started. Khirsten, you want to give anything?
No, I do think that it's really interesting that we're having this conversation to like pair the two of like how you think about relationships while pursuing these academic endeavors, because sometimes the recommendation or the advice is to wait, or you don't want to be distracted. It's always viewed as something that can be that can deter you, or it needs to be a positive relationship, or else it could make you not reach your goal. So I think that there's often a lot, or there can be some negative energy around what it means to be in a relationship, or you hear a lot of horror stories about how it failed and it made me mess up everything else. But I think that when the relationship is mutual and boundaries are set and communication is very strong, those types of energies can be undone.
Okay. So what has been your experience, I guess, in a relationship and starting a new degree? You started your relationship right as you were starting a new degree program, and that's something that we really don't hear people do. So what has been your experience?
Right. So in addition to starting my relationship at the time that I started my PhD program, I also moved 400 miles away from my boyfriend, who at the time wasn't my boyfriend. We actually were just dating prior to me starting the program, and then when I moved, we made it official, which would seem like kind of contradictory, but that's how it happened. But I think that my experience has taught me a lot about myself and how I have to resist my desire to control situations. One thing that I found myself doing very early was attempting to micromanage my boyfriend and my relationship and come up with ways that we could change the dynamics of our relationship, meaning I could move here, or you could do this, or we could do that, as opposed to just letting the relationship organically evolve and take things for how they were coming. So it really gave me a lot of insight into who I was and how I handled things, and how much I wanted that academic way of order and structure to be the guiding principles of the relationship. And in some ways they are, but in a lot of ways they can be detrimental because I miss a lot of the human aspects of interacting with another person and learning from them and taking their strong suits and approaches and comparing them to mine, or tweaking them so that we can figure out what works best for us. And ultimately that has been the most helpful thing, to figure out what worked best for us and not this like cookie cutter or scheduled idea of a relationship, because what we have is like nothing else anybody else has. And while we can find overlap and learn from other people, it's very important to always come back to each other and reevaluate what worked and what didn't work.
So I have a question. So in the academic world, we're PhD candidates, we're about to go into the job market, we're about to become junior faculty at some institution. We do books right, but we don't necessarily do communication right, or so we think. We can communicate perfectly in a classroom, on a panel, in an article that's 30 pages long. We can communicate. However, those communication skills don't necessarily transfer over, from my experience, into a relationship. So, like, what does that look like, trying to navigate that space from you're going from a dead object to communicating about the dead object to trying to communicate with a living, breathing person who has feelings and emotions just like you do, and that's not an academic.
Right. So, again, I mean, everything for me goes back to control. Like, when I'm writing an article, when I'm teaching a class, when I'm reading a book, when I'm doing anything that is within my academic purview, I'm in control of it.
Absolutely.
I dictate my schedule. I dictate the content. While other people may influence it, I have the ultimate say in, like, this is how this will look. This is what I accept. This is what I reject. And I think that in relationships, it just can't be that way. Like, I mean, it can't. And I think that we get tripped up because naturally I think that someone is more vocal than the other person, or someone could be more of a leader than the other person, or more assertive, or more of a planner, more outgoing, whatever the case may be. But when you start to look at those things as a balancing act instead of like until he or she says this, then we don't. Like, when it's less about control and more about give and take, and you are consulting, you're consulting one another more often, as opposed to like putting all the weight onto one person, I think that the relationship becomes easier to navigate. I also think that, like, through prayer, a lot is revealed. Like, you get a lot of insight into, like, why a person may be less assertive, or
absolutely,
or the clutteredness of their thoughts may be a result of lacking spiritual guidance or conversations. And so what I found, especially most recently, is that when the spiritual strand of my relationship is off, every other interaction falls apart. And so you can't hear each other. Like, if you aren't hearing from God, you can't hear each other. You really can't interact with each other, because everything is going to be a fight. Like, you just going to keep bumping heads. And so when I released the control to say that, like, most of the times I was controlling things because it was just me. But when I knew that, and I'm not trying to say that, like, relationships are the same 3-strand relationship as a marriage. I'm not going that far. But I do think that it's very similar. Like, and those are the preparation for those things if you are on such a path. That, like, when you are seeking God in this 2-person interaction, the threeness becomes very essential to how you move forward. And that, like, the words that you use, even when there's a disagreement, when there is a different approach to things, when there's a different way that I may see something, that my intentions are received differently. Like, I could be very frustrated, I could be very upset, but my delivery is going to reflect maybe the prayer that I had before I came to the situation. That everything shifts once, well, for me, everything shifted once I stopped searching for avenues for control.
So I guess my question is this. If we assume that we can communicate because we can exegete a text, right? We teach a classroom, we teach material. Is that really communication that we're doing?
Yeah,
or
but
is that
explanation? No, it's communication. Because you have to say, like, when you create a class, you have to clearly outline your expectations. You have to say, here are the due dates. Here is this. Communication has very basic tenets, in my opinion. Like, I think that the sharing of expectations is something that you share in a relationship, and you have to share often.
Okay.
I think that, like, creating boundaries, maybe not to say, like, by August 21st, you must call me, but saying that, like, daily communication is important to me. Or weekly communication is important to me. So that there's no lapse in, like, what you want and what the other person wants. There has to be a constant revisiting of, so to speak, what you expect and how you meet those expectations. And so communication is it's not like I'm going to make a syllabus, like a contractual agreement for the relationship. But I think that it might be too far to say that the communications aren't the same. Are they delivered differently? Certainly. Your students don't have the wherewithal to say to you, well, Miss Whiteside, what about if I turn that in on Thursday at 5? No, I said it's due on Tuesday at 2.
And I'm not going to
And that's it. However, that does not mean that communication doesn't exist. Mm-hmm. It just means that who is in control, and if there is a two-way street of the boundaries.
So what happens then, if we're talking about control, and we have control in the classroom, mm-hmm. you have control over your work, mm-hmm. you have control over so many things in the academy, but you don't have control over another person.
Right, but you have control over
that's all you have control
yourself over. In that situation.
Your
and when I'm relying on control here, what I'm more so saying is you can't think of control as an individual exercise in a relationship. Like, both parties have the potential to control, dictate, and shape their relationship. And you have to think about it as such. Like, you can't think of it as, I set the rules.
Okay.
I'm the woman, I say this, I say that, or I'm the man, I say this, I say that. That when it is active communication and constant revisiting of boundaries, expectations, I
want to pause you there because you said a word. You said active communication. Mm-hmm. There's a difference between communication, passive communication, active communication. Mm-hmm. So, why is active communication important, and what even does that even look like? What does active communication even look like?
Work. It's like a lot of work. Active communication, and I don't want to say it's hard, but my God, you have to get outside of yourself. Like, there are days where you could feel like, I already know what I want. I don't really care what you want. I don't really care if I'm standing behind this, you've already decided this, and you've never taken the time to hear the other person's side, but it doesn't matter because you already know, based on your experience, based on who you are, what you want, how you see this relationship, that you're not bending on this.
Okay.
And it may not be the other person wants you to bend, but you've already mapped in your mind that this is what this thing looks like. That's not active communication in my mind. Active communication is like releasing that micromanaging. That first attempt is like micromanaging the communication. So I'm going to say today, what do you think about, these loaded questions? Like, what do you think about our future?
Loaded questions are or attempts to micromanage?
I think so.
Woo!
From my experience and my participation in relationships, okay. I have very often used loaded questions to kind of get inside somebody's head without really getting to the heart of what I wanted to say because it felt easier. But again, you are dealing with another person who can read these things and feel them. Like, if I'm interacting with you daily, I can tell when you're genuinely asking me something versus when you are attempting to get around, this, that, or the other and get to something else. And so when I say active, I mean very genuine, open, consistent, and heartfelt communication.
Do you think academics struggle with that? Some.
I mean, yeah, but I think people struggle with it. But I think academics probably struggle with it a lot more because we've been conditioned to present things in a very like factual,
tight way.
This is what this is. This is how I found this. I dare you to say I got it wrong because I got 5 other things that I'm gonna pull out my bag to show you why I was right. It's very argumentative. Like our communication is very matter of fact.
That's good. Good.
And so, but I will admit that sometimes that matter of factness is necessary in a relationship. Like when you are saying what you desire, when you are communicating your expectations, I do think that you need to be unyielding on those things. That like, I do not want this. You know, there doesn't need to be any like metaphors, or possible holes that could be poked or whatever. But I do think that academic or not, having open conversation is hard because it means that you are also, as you're talking with another person, you're confronting yourself. Like you're really undoing a lot of the things that make you who you are. And it might not feel like it in the moment. It might be a week, a day, the next hour or so that you realize like, I thought that, or why didn't I think that, or why don't I care? Whatever the case may be, it becomes a reflection, you know. And so it's like a double-sided mirror. What is it? Whatever, the type of mirror where you see yourself as you're talking. You know, someone else is on the other side of it. So I think that communication is just hard. And the deeper you get into a relationship, you're pulling back layers of a person. So at the same time that you're pulling those layers back of another person, you're also pulling them back on yourself. And so you may not be ready to deal with. You may have thought that you dealt with some things, and now it's coming back up, or you may have never dealt with it. I know one thing that I struggle with is that I thought I had it all together, and I didn't expect another person to bring out things in me, and I was just like, what is this? I thought we were done with this 10 years ago. So here we are. And then having the courage to walk through those spaces that are now.
Or to trust them to walk through the space with you. I think that's a pretty tough thing, especially if you experience any type of abandonment or you perceiving yourself still within a certain way, like as a graduate student, still trying to find their voice, and you've already experienced these negative things that happen in your pursuit of a PhD at certain institutions. And so then you come over here, which is another vulnerable space because your work is largely personal. And you come into a relationship in a personal space, and it's tough to trust the other person with the weight of who you are. And so then it kind of becomes a struggle, a fight, a war.